The prime thing is you have to win.
There you go. There you go. That's what I'm talking about. Hey, Mark, settle down a little bit.
Sorry.
He had a prop going. All right. You got
Tried
me
out
on
my
that
new outfit that Raider fans should be wearing to the
You
games.
forgot
from now
you
on.
forgot the eye holes, man. You forgot the eye holes.
Didn't have time for that. But yeah, welcome back to the Just Win podcast. I'm your host, Ted Nguyen. That's my co-host, Marshall Newhouse. And yeah, the Raiders just lost to the Cleveland Browns 24-10. Obviously, the Browns have a amazing defense, as we saw, but man, that was one of the more pathetic efforts I think I've seen from the Raiders in a long time. That's saying a lot.
Yeah, that we knew going in this was going to be a different type of matchup between two and 8 teams. As soon as the Shedeur start was announced, there's going to be a different set of eyeballs on this game. But I thought the Raiders legit had a chance. I thought there was something about being in this position and a team that was also just floundering. They haven't played ball in 2 months. The Browns team, they're figuring their own QB situation out, and you made Shedeur look competent. Now I think on his own, there's a chance that he is more competent than he's been given credit for. That's not our story as much as the Raiders. Just they look like they're flopping around, man. It was tough to watch from decisions that were made that inevitably led to 10 sacks tonight by this Browns defense. Yes, Myles Garrett, fine, but we can talk about that. To just the lack of execution. Geno threw for, we were talking about it, 285, but it just felt like a lot of balls were just dropping 3 yards short of a guy, 2 yards over his head, 1 yard. And so, again, the continued trend of these guys not feeling like they're in sync, the offense not feeling like it's in an intentional rhythm. And so if you're the Raiders, the look in the mirror has to be long and hard. And at this point, you're looking for positives, and it's just hard to find them.
Yeah, I mean, they had their shots at some big plays. Obviously, Trey Tucker was getting open against the secondary, and Geno was getting hit a lot. A lot of these misses, he was getting hit right as he was throwing. And I think an elite quarterback makes those throws, but he's just not that right now, and
Right.
It's been not close to it. So it's been rough. But I think this might be one of the worst offensive lines at its current state that I've seen in a while, and everything kind of stems from there because you can't run the ball with your sixth overall pick, 50 yards today. Not good. And he was able to make some plays outside, as a receiver. You can't get the protection you need. If Geno just had a little bit more time on some of these passes, I think he might hit a couple more, and that could be the difference in this game. And I think the defense was holding as long as they can, and then they kind of just let go in the fourth quarter. So, everything stems back to this offensive line, and losing Colton Miller sucks. Losing Jackson Powers Johnson sucks. And like you mentioned, they were chipping Myles Garrett for most of this game, but they stopped doing that in a 2-minute drill. He got a sack. On some plays, they had 7 in protection, and then they only had 2 guys running routes, and nobody could get open because you only have 2 guys in routes against 7 guys in coverage. So it's just rough, man.
Yeah, the offensive line is, that's where I played, and I take a lot of pride in talking about other teams around the league's offensive line and their situation and trying to add context. And the context right now is, as you said, they're just not very good. They're not talented. And before those injuries, they had holes, they had flaws, but you felt like if 1 or 2 positions, you could count on, then you could help the other ones. That's how this group of 5 guys usually works. But you've got 5 weak points, and that's just it's a non-starter. And so we want to be fairly critical of Geno. We want to be fairly critical of Chip Kelly and make sure that we're asking the right questions. We want to be fairly critical of a rookie Ashton Genty and all the receivers and how they run routes. None of that gets started without some level of competency in the offensive line room. And it pains me to say it because I hated when people, were so harshly critical. Listen, I'm okay. I was okay as a player getting criticized.
Hey,
That
I'm
was
on the
part of
same
it.
side as you, man.
Well, Ted used to talk shit about me, but no, I'm just kidding. No, but I was always okay with like objective, like, fair criticism. But I'm always trying to stand in the way of people just unloading on guys. But they don't have a chance right now, and that's just unfortunate. So you don't even get some semblance of the Geno that you thought you were getting from Seattle. Now we think he's a reduced version of that, regardless. But you're not even getting a competent Geno, where you see, okay, yeah, he's releasing the ball and it's losing a little bit of touch, a little bit of accuracy because he's just getting hit right at the end. And we're not seeing. Listen, we could talk about this is a holistic issue for the Raiders because the personnel kind of flows downhill into the players and the coaching. So the choice to take Ashton Genty, as much as I love him as a player, over what people assume Mimbu, who was there, or another top lineman, means that you thought you had more stability in the offensive line and more depth in that room than you have. And it's borne its head even worse now that you lost, I think, your two best linemen. And so moving forward, we talked about it last week, and it's going to continue to be the story, is this team building issues and the train, as so to speak, and who's on board the train. Which direction are we rowing? Is it the same direction from Spytech, Tom Brady as a consultant, whatever the degree of his role is, to Pete Carroll and the either subtraction of him or the addition of other coaches, whatever it is, rowing in the same direction with the same vision in mind, because they have so many holes, and the offensive line, it doesn't give his offense a chance to get off the ground, and then a defense that has its own holes that's just trying to, put gum in the boat, in the holes in the boat, just so it doesn't sink. That they just, from the jump, they don't have a chance. And I said last show, coming into this game, you always have to kind of recalibrate for a QB that doesn't have a lot of tape. The only tape Shedeur has that they have on Shedeur is preseason, when there's a lot of just guys that aren't even in the league anymore, or their practice squads elsewhere, and they have half a game from last week. So this was an unscouted type of game, but the Browns kept it pretty conservative. The plays that he made that were big were extending the play, and I give him tons of credit for that, because one of his biggest flaws was that his natural tendency was, when he felt pressure, retreat. He retreated a couple times, but he would roll out quickly, and he would buy himself time and space, and he'd make plays on the edge and down the field. And it felt like the Raiders left guys kind of running free, not sure that was going to be part of this game plan. And then he had some guys who were more wide open. They tricked him one time on the pick. They dropped in the zone when he wasn't prepared on that spot route. But overall, he played just he was a game manager. And then he took a couple shots. And honestly, the Raiders could do with that. I'd say all the time that teams sometimes need a guy to manage the game before he could be good or even great. But that keeps you in the game. And so the Browns figured that out. The Raiders did not. Where do they go from here?
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about it before the game. Like, if Cleveland goes up a touchdown or two possessions, it's pretty much over, because this had to be a low scoring game, and they allowed those two quick touchdowns early in the game, and it was pretty much over because they just could not get any offense going against this defensive front, which was just a really bad matchup on a lot of different levels for this offense. So yeah, I mean, that was pretty much the game early on. And where do they go from here? I mean, I think they're starting to align themselves, I feel like, to fire Pete Carroll. Because you're seeing some of these stories leak. Albert Beer had a story. I think Amy Trask said something about somebody in the organization. I forgot his name. I'll find that later. But there's these leaks coming out, and people starting to talk about Pete Carroll getting fired, and it's not just them pondering about it. It seems like it's coming from somewhere. Yeah. So I think unfortunately, I don't think the front office has done a great job either. But I think they're probably gonna get a chance. Spytech is he knows Tom Brady. That was, I think, Tom Brady's first choice. Pete Carroll was pretty much Tom Brady's third choice because they were trying to go all in for Ben Johnson.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think they wanted Liam Cohen, but Cohen didn't even accept an interview from them.
Wow.
And then they kind of just went with Pete Carroll. And obviously, I think those type of coaches, those offensive coaches that are so hot, and those are the guys that really get, are up there when it comes to interest whenever it is a coaching cycle. Those guys want quarterbacks. They want a young quarterback to work with, or they want somebody to think they can work with. And at the time, the Raiders still don't really have a quarterback. And I don't, depending on how they do this season and where their draft position is, maybe they'll be in position to draft one. But those offensive whiz kids that, they want quarterbacks to work with. And no matter how much money you throw at them, if they don't feel like they have a chance to groom a young quarterback and create an ecosystem to win long term, they're not going to accept your offer.
Yeah, I don't want to. I agree with that. I mean, that's interesting, the news about Pete Carroll, and it just feels that way because I understand why he is the way he is, because what he built in Seattle was a certain way, and why would he come here at his age, signing up for a rebuild? I get the rationale behind that, but he is not in lockstep with where this organization is, and it shows itself every week. I don't want to get too much into draft talk because we'll probably do more of that as the season goes on. But I was talking to a fan online about this coming April. The Raiders already have 10 picks. I think they might trade back for more, but this fan wanted them to go aggressive for a QB at the top of the draft. And I just said, yeah, maybe if he's there and you believe in it and you're all bought in, that's one thing. But this team has so many more holes that, I look at Cam Ward and I just say, unless he is a dude and you're like, all right, he's a dude, and then we'll backfill the rest of the roster. I would rather do the opposite because the Raiders have just so many places that they need help in. And in a quote unquote weak draft, it feels really like bad business to stretch and to give out a lot of capital for a guy who just might not, if we're drafting, 3 classes in a row, just hypothetically, if he wouldn't go the top of those 3 classes, he's not a guy, like a blue chip guy that I want to sell out for. And so tell me how you feel about the Raiders and roster building either through the draft. I know they have a lot of cap space. Tell me about, how your feelings on that moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think let's say they finish top 5 and let's say they're picking 5, and then Fernando Mendoza is clearly the unanimous number 1. Maybe he's not number 1 in most drafts, but in this draft, he's definitely number 1. So if you were 5 and you had to trade up to get Mendoza, it's going to cost you a lot. There's other quarterback prospects like Ty Simpson, Dante Moore. I think Dante Moore is going back to school. I don't think he's going out. Yeah, unless he gets feedback that his stock is really, really high, he's probably going back. So that really leaves you with 2 good quarterback prospects. Ty Simpson, you still have to watch a tape to see if he's worth it. He looks like a really good prospect.
He's a smaller body guy. I worry about him. So yeah, okay.
He's not a high end traits guy that usually would go top 5, top 10. So, like, you would probably have to trade your 2027 first round pick to move up to get Mendoza, and 2027 is supposed to be a much better quarterback class because all the quarterbacks that we thought were going to go in this class is going to go in the next class. So I think I agree with you. I think, unless you have a chance at Mendoza and you just draft him without giving up all this capital, then you should probably build your team up for a quarterback coming up next. I mean, obviously you want to take that shot at a quarterback, but you don't want to blow a top 5 pick because you're reaching, to grab one.
Yeah. And that's kind of, that's where I land too. And, you're going to have tackles that are there. Ruben Bain might be there, like multiple kind of, I think, more sure, less risky picks that can be foundational pieces that will support an eventual quarterback. And again, Geno has not shown me that he's the guy that I'm just we're set on forever. But in this current iteration, with this contract coming up next year, I think you have one more year where he could be competent enough if things aren't falling apart all around him. And still you draft a kid later in the draft that's got quarterback, or you plan on getting a high pick in the year after's draft. To me, I'm okay with that real short term if it gets me pieces that are draft and day one starters and impact pieces. And so that is where this Raiders team is. Stone Forsythe had his hands full. Myles Garrett, I blocked Myles Garrett. He is one of the all-time great talents. I think he'll go down as one of the best ever if he keeps doing it, if he stays healthy. And they as we talked about, they chipped for him. They game planned for him. And he still got his pressure, still got his sacks. They had 10 sacks as a unit. Stone is just he's a swing tackle. He's a backup tackle. Parham, I agree. I don't think he's a starter in this league as well. Meredith, I'm questioning if I think he is a backup inside three, guard, center, guard. And then Glaze is still young. I think he has a lot of room to grow. I still have belief in him, but they are lacking in talent in the trenches. And again, we'll reiterate, so many other things just don't work if you can't get those guys playing better, and that's just a talent thing. And so we saw Geno take shots at Brock Bowers. He was covered heavily in man. He had to rush throws. Trey Tucker got open a couple times. It was tough to see. This wasn't a well-played game by the Browns. I don't even think that was the hardest part, was they didn't just beat you like a drum. It just you were kind of feckless. You couldn't do a whole lot, and that's a tough thing to see. I understand Raiders fans' frustrations, but we got to support an organization finding their intent, finding their vision, and being on the same page, just going for it. And right now, I'm waiting for signs that they're understanding the assignment, because until then, I don't think things are going to improve magically on the field.
Yeah, and by the way, leave your questions on the chat, and we'll answer that at the end. Do you think did you watch Glaze when he was in college? Because
No, I did not.
There was some there's some teams that thought he was going to be a guard. So I wonder if the Raiders get a right tackle, can you bump Glaze down to guard? Because that's what I was thinking. If they drafted Membu, they could move Glaze down to guard, and then you have JPJ playing either center or one of the guard spot or the left guard spot, and then that's a pretty solid offensive line if Glaze can make that transition. But I mean, when you look at free agency, I feel like they should probably address their offensive line through free agency. This tackle class is supposed to be not as strong as the previous tackle classes we've seen, from what I've heard. I haven't studied them, so I think the first step with fixing this line is you got to throw the bag at Tyler Lindenbaum, the center from the Ravens, who's set to be a free agent. I don't think they'll franchise tag him, because if you franchise tag him, you have to pay the top 5 average for.
That's a high number for a center. Yeah.
So it'll be a lot. It'll be very high for a center. So I think he'll be, entering free agency. At least it works out the deal with the Ravens. But I mean, I would throw a bag at him just to get that center spot fixed and somebody that knows what they're doing, especially if you're thinking about bringing in a young quarterback.
Yeah, I'd like to see kind of the pending free agent list and who might be a good fit. But yeah, they've got a lot of cap space, and I think they should be aggressive in a couple of spots just to listen. You want to continue to evaluate people. You cannot evaluate anyone from this game because of the status of the offensive line. And I can't say it enough, and that's just unfortunate. Small positive note was just Max Crosby being a dude again. I've seen a lot of stars in this league in situations like this turn it off. Man, the dude doesn't turn it off. I just have to give him credit. And he gets paid to. I'm like, all right, cool, but he has every reason to save his body and not do all the little things. And man, he does. And they're chipping him, they're double teaming him, and he's working his tail off, using his hands and attacking. They only got to Shedeur one time for 1 sack, but I give Max Crosby a ton of credit. And you want guys like that in an attitude sense. Obviously, he's a world-class talent, but that is the type of attitude that this defense needs. And they've got to be on the lookout both in free agency and the draft for players like that. Duh. But there's a level of mentality that goes into this that I believe is a quote unquote Raiders style of playing that he embodies completely. And it's just I got to give him credit while we're trying to fix the team otherwise, because it's fun watching him even amongst the disappointing results on the TV.
Yeah, I mean, I think if they don't draft a quarterback, if they get Averill Reese to pair with Max
You love
Crosby,
Averill Reese. I'm going to watch some film on him. You love him.
yeah, you haven't watched much Reese this season.
I've been watching Ruben Bain a lot. I'm really excited
Ruben Bain's
about
a
him.
beast, too.
He might not fall to the Raiders, but I like him a lot just from a position versatility too. You could see him rushing from the 3. You could see him being an edge setting, kind of a thicker defensive end, but he's got great bend, really good hand strength. He would complement Crosby really, really well because you could move you could play them on the same side of the line, or you could have them both rush edges. I just think there's a lot of stuff you could do with a Ruben Bain.
Yeah, Bain's a beast too. But man, I was just watching that Texans game on Thursday and watching Will Anderson and Daniil Hunter go after it. Man, those guys are monsters. If you have 2 bookends, that solves a lot of problems for you defensively.
Yeah, and then there's. Tell me how you feel about this. I wasn't paying as close attention back then, but there's talk about the Tyree Wilson, Will Anderson conversation and how they ranked coming out of that draft and just the different directions, trajectories that their careers have gone in. Tyree, kind of a look like Tarzan guy that just hasn't put it together yet, and Will Anderson he's just wrecking shop down there. It's just I imagine that's pretty tough to see for Raiders fans, knowing listen, Houston traded up for him, but I imagine that's pretty tough for Raiders fans to watch.
Yeah, I mean, Tyree was that physical freak, and you saw him make plays in college, even with really bad technique. And, you projected him to be a guy that, and it wasn't just the Raiders. He was high up on the draft board for a lot of teams. Obviously, Will Anderson was number 1. I don't think I think there's probably some people that were debating it in their mock draft or whatever, but I thought he was clearly heads and shoulders above Tyree, who was a little bit of a project. Well, a lot of a project, but he made some progress last year, and he just has not made any progress this year. And I don't know what it is with him, but he's just like he can't use his hands consistently. There's some rushes he gets his hands up, and then when he does use his hands, you see that physical power, that explosion, and just that raw ability. But when he doesn't use his hands, he just kind of chest bumps with people. And it's hard to pass rush like that, especially when you're as long-limbed as he is.
Yeah, I used to hate going against guys like that who knew how to leverage their arms and use them. If they gave their chest, I was happy to take it. I'd put my hands right there, and then the blocks would be done. And him being such a physical specimen and having not learned that trait yet, it kind of concerns you because at some point you want a guy to take ownership of that. Hey, be like, hey, Max, I'm come training with you this offseason. Like you find some kind of assertiveness where you're like, I have to fix this part of my game because it could take me to that next level. And that hasn't clicked for him. And he's just he's a specimen. But I've seen a lot of guys who look like him who are just doing cardio at the end of the day on Sundays. So listen, the Raiders, they have a lot to fix personnel wise. We've talked all season about personnel in-game fixes and play calling fixes, and just tonight proved that all is kind of moot if you just don't have the guys. And right now they don't have the guys. That's unfortunate. I want to be able to give more. I'm going to watch the film and get back to you guys later this week. But man, on the first glance, it's just a rough watch.
Yeah, like we could talk and criticize all we want about play calling and those things, but it's the margin is so thin right now that it's just hard. And the restrictions you have as a play caller on both sides of the ball are just real, so it's like we can criticize all we want, but at the same time, I still think they could do a better job at some point in some areas, but
for sure
it's rough when you don't have the personnel. And today was as glaring because that Cleveland defense is truly, an elite unit, and they just overwhelmed the Raiders. All right, let's get into some questions. All right, first question from Jorge Meza Guzman. Why is Pete so loyal to Geno right now? I think, obviously Pete was the one who brought him in. Pete was the one who resurrected his career, and those two have a special relationship. And I think r- right now there's just not a lot any quarterback can do behind this line, and I think I still think Gino deserves blame for his play, but at the same time, like when you're watching, it's just very obvious that he's under duress on nearly every play.
Yeah, listen, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. Is Pete loyal because yeah, they had a bond in Seattle and he got the best out of Gino in Seattle and he felt like, all right, this is a guy I trust down here. Yes. Has Gino played good enough, in my opinion, to justify his contract? No. But also, did you want Kenny Pickett? Did you want Aiden O'Connell? The options just aren't there as well. And so again, this is a personnel situation on the roster. They don't have it right now. And it's one thing if you had drafted a guy second or third round a year or two ago, and you're like, all right, we're already in the basement. Let's get him some reps. He wouldn't, no matter who that hypothetical person was, he'd still look like trash behind this line and with this unit. And secondly, it's just there's not a point to it. Gino, it still gives you the best bet as tough as that is going into each Sunday.
Yeah. All right, next question from Oakland Raiders fan 99. Do you think there is any chance Pete would force Brennan out as O-line coach? I think if they do bring Pete back, that's one of the conditions that they're going to have as far as bringing him back, is they have to have a new offensive line coach because it's been pretty bad.
Yeah, I would say to answer the question specifically, no, because I don't think Pete would let him go, which means I think, as you were alluding to earlier, there's rumors to kind of move on from Pete Carroll. Listen, call it nepotism, whatever you want to call it. Even as the guys have gotten hurt and they've been at a talent loss, I saw things consistently from this offensive line that tell me that the details in practice just aren't there. I'm talking feet, hands, consistently, communication, both in who we're going to and run and pass, to communicating the guy left and right to you, being in lockstep on combo blocks. And there just hasn't been much there that signals to me that there is like this unspoken potential that's there. And so obviously, Brendan Carroll has had some experience in the NFL and in college. But to me, they're linked. They're tied together at the hip. Pete doesn't have much longer in the NFL. Even if things somehow manage to get better, they keep him, whatever. He doesn't have much longer. He's already 73. So I just think that they are kind of tied together at this point, unfortunately. And I think the Raiders might be better off finding someone he is young, like an offensive line coach that has a specific style that they are bought into. Because if I asked you, what do you think Brendan Carroll teaches this offensive line, you wouldn't know, because nothing shows up consistently on Sunday to be like point to, oh, that is what they're trying to do consistently. And so to answer your question, no, I don't think Pete will force him out. I do think they need to move on though.
Yeah, and I will say there are people in the building that are very critical of Brennan as well. So they are aware of the issue. All right, Jesse Lateral. How badly would it look for the Raiders to part ways with a Hall of Fame coach like Carroll to prospective new head coaches, Shula versus everyone else? I don't think the Hall of Fame part matters in the equation. I mean, he was fired from Seattle and he didn't get a job right away. It's not like he was the hottest candidate. So I think people are kind of seeing that, he potentially the game might potentially have passed him by or whatever it is. So it's not that bad of a look. I think it's worse of a look that they fired so many coaches consecutively. That's a bad look. But at the same time, it's like sunk cost fallacy, like you don't want to just keep going down this road just to keep going down this road if it's not working.
That's a great point. The sunk cost fallacy of feeling like you're just stuck here just because you don't want to look like you're moving on too fast. I mean, literally the Raiders with their coaches in the last 4 or 5 years are that Grim Reaper meme where he's going door to door, knocking, and one after another, coaches are gone in 1 or 2 seasons. And that's just an unfortunate recent history for this organization. but they shouldn't be afraid to. That doesn't mean you then are afraid to do the right thing moving forward. Whatever they actually believe, the sunk cost fallacy just means the next decision still needs to be based in the same kind of logic and not anchored in the past. And so, and this is Pete's most likely last stop. I don't know who would hire him as a head guy. His style requires a building of a culture, which I'm on record saying I liked when they hired him, because I thought that was something to build on. But they can't even get to that because it feels like there's we talk about all the time, the disconnect between what he's looking for and what the personnel front office is looking for.
Yeah, and looking in hindsight, like anytime you bring in a guy that you're just hoping could be good for like a few years, like those type of hires like rarely work out, because you're hoping that he could be a placeholder for a few years. And it's like when you hired him, you already know the ceiling isn't that high because he was like down on the list of coaches you wanted. So
yeah,
it's just
you don't look for a girlfriend or a boyfriend hoping that this is just temporary. This is the stepping stone before the better one, the best one. So
yeah, maybe some people think like that, but
maybe there are. Hey,
not
man,
good to think
maybe
like
there
that.
are people that do.
All right, last question. Ivan asked, Ted, seems like Carroll and Spy aren't on the same page. Would they bring back Carroll? Also, what do you think about Saleh or Rams defensive coordinator Chris Shula as potential head coaches? We talked about most of this already, but yeah, Spy Tech seems like he wants to develop a lot of these project type of guys and but also drafting a running back 6 overall doesn't signal that you're trying to develop, be part of a developmental type of project. And why would they bring back Carroll? The only reason why they would bring back Carroll at this point is if they really believe that the personnel is that bad and they don't want to fire another head coach consecutively. I think Saleh is, could be a really good coach too. I mean, I think he's doing a really good job with the Niners defense, dealing with all their injuries. I thought he was unfairly fired from the Jets. Chris Shula, I think, he's doing one of the best jobs of any defensive coordinator this year. McVay said out of all the guys that he's had, he's prepared Chris Shula the most to be a head coach. And we know what kind of success those McVay guys had. So I think, he would be a great candidate too.
Yeah, on the Pete Carroll stuff, you answered it. We've talked about it enough. I love the idea of Saleh. I love the idea of Shula. Saleh specifically because, listen, that Jets organization has a level of snake bittenness to it. He went in there, was trying to do his style, and then yes, you understand he takes it. I don't know how much of the ratio of the choosing Aaron Rodgers in that state was him or Woody Johnson's son, what combination that was, but it felt like he got railroaded just because we now know that Aaron Rodgers was inputting his choice in the decision making on some of these hires and some of these personnel decisions. And I don't think that was a fair shake, and that it feels very Jetsian the way things went and ended there for Saleh. I think he's got, and I imagine he's the type of guy, being an aggressive, defensive-minded guy who's been in successful organizations, that he's like, was not my best effort. I have a lot of things that I want to fix from that and learn from those mistakes. And so I think Saleh would be a great hire. And I think Shula, as you mentioned, most of McVay's proteges, if you will, have been offensively minded. But Shula has really come on, and that quote speaks a ton. You saw what they did to Seattle and Sam Darnold. Like, he very much understands game to game prepping his defense and the personnel that they have for what they're about to face. And yeah, the hot coordinators who become head coaches are offensive minded. They want a quarterback. But I absolutely believe that if this Raiders team could become a defensive minded team and then fill in the gaps and still find you a quarterback, they could compete, because you look at the AFC, everyone's kind of in flux right now. There's a lot of older head coaches who are kind of slowly being phased out, and then you have a lot of younger guys who are trying to prove themselves. The Raiders, to me, once they kind of get on the same page personnel-wise, are not as far off as it seems. But that would start really on a positive footnote if they got a guy like Shula from a defensive standpoint instead of an offensive standpoint. But I like both of those guys potentially.
If it's a defensive minded head coach, you could bet that pick is going to be Bain or Reese in a first round next year.
I'm telling you, and listen, that's pretty nice to start off with. I wouldn't shake a stick at that if that's how it went. I would not at all.
Yeah. I mean, to me, D'Amico Ryans, who got hired by the Texans, is one of the best head coaching hires in a while. Like their offense stinks, but I mean, I love watching that team play. They play so hard. So it definitely does not have to be an offensive minded head coach. There's some really good defensive head coaches or candidates that will be in this year's coaching cycle, and I feel like defenses are kind of fighting back. They're not like sitting back in zone and just playing, a certain style of defense. I feel like they're very tailored week after week. At least the best defensive coordinators are very tailored out week after week, and that takes some creativity. And you can see some of the top defenses, they do a lot of different things.
Well, I like some of these younger guys who are taking chances. One of my former teammates, Kelvin Shepard, defense coordinator in Detroit, he's playing a lot of just base. He's saying, "Screw you, we're going to beat you up," and he's keeping 3 linebackers on the field a lot, and he's just battering teams. They won today, a little bit of a shootout, but Kafka and the Giants are just trying to throw anything to see what sticks with Jameis. But I like a guy like Kelvin Shepard who's just thinking about it differently and is, I think, open to adapting. And there's just something about the youth part of that is I'm not so set in my ways that I'm just like, it's my way or the highway. And so there's something to be said about that. So we'll see what the Raiders, how they view this upcoming crop and where they want to go from here.
Yeah. But as of right now, Pete Carroll is still the head coach of the Raiders. We'll still be here. We'll preview the next game coming up this week. But thank you for so many of you guys joining us, even after a really ugly loss like that. Marshall is great as always, and we will talk to you guys on Thursday.
Appreciate you guys. Thank you.